It all started on a cold February night in Anchorage, Alaska. An 18-year-old barista named Samantha Koenig was just finishing up her shift at a little coffee kiosk. But she never made it home. And what began as a pretty standard missing person case would soon spiral into a desperate hunt for a new kind of monster. A killer who would terrify even the most seasoned agents at the FBI.
See, her boyfriend was supposed to pick her up that night, but when he got there, the kiosk was totally dark and Samantha was just gone. This one question, what in the world happened after she closed up shop, was the spark that ignited a frantic nationwide investigation.
So the next morning, that's February 2nd, 2012, a coworker shows up to open the Common Grounds coffee stand, and right away, she gets that awful feeling in her gut. The door's unlocked, things are a mess, and the cash register is completely empty. I mean, it had all the signs of a robbery, but where was Samantha?
Okay, so let's walk through those first few hours, because the signals were all over the place. At 8:30 p.m., her boyfriend, Dwayne, finds the place empty. A little while later, he gets this really weird text from her phone saying she needed space and was hanging out with friends. But then, the next morning, nobody can get a hold of her. And that's when her dad, James, knew this was serious. He reported his only daughter missing.
Right away, this split into two completely different theories. You had the police, who looked at the empty cash register and that weird text message and thought, okay, this looks like a robbery and maybe she's a runaway. But her father, James, who had raised her since she was just 2 years old, he knew better. He felt it deep down. This wasn't his daughter. She would never ever just vanish without telling him. He was convinced she'd been abducted.
And it turns out, her father's instinct was tragically, horribly correct. That whole runaway theory, it got completely blown out of the water the second the coffee shop owner handed over the security footage from that night.
The footage was grainy and there was no sound, but it told a story that was absolutely terrifying. You see Samantha working. She hands a drink out the window to a customer. And then, all of a sudden, her hands shoot up in the air. A dark figure leaps through that tiny service window. You can see him tying her hands, and then he pulls a gun, forcing her out the back door. This was no runaway. This was a violent abduction, and it was all caught on tape.
So, with concrete proof of an abduction, the FBI was called in immediately, but the investigation hit a brick wall right from the start. The footage was just too blurry to get an ID on the guy, and there was zero other evidence to go on. For weeks, the case went completely cold, leaving her family and the entire community in just agonizing suspense.
And then a really bizarre break. 3 weeks after she disappeared, her boyfriend gets another text. This one directs him and her father to a park nearby. And there, tacked to a bulletin board, they find a Ziploc bag. Inside, a ransom note. For the first time in what must have felt like an eternity, there was a sign that Samantha might actually still be alive.
The note was chillingly specific. The kidnapper demanded $30,000, and he wanted it deposited into Samantha's own bank account. And to prove she was alive, he included what's called a proof of life photo. It was a picture of Samantha holding a recent newspaper. She looked dazed, but she was there. He promised to release her, unharmed, 6 months after he got the money. And for her family, that was everything. It was a real reason to hope.
The FBI told her dad to deposit a little bit of the money to spring the trap. And pretty soon, withdrawals started popping up. First in Alaska. But by the time agents swarmed the ATMs, the suspect, always wearing a ski mask, was long gone. Then the trail moved south to Arizona, then New Mexico, and finally Texas. The chase was officially on.
And it's in Texas that investigators finally got the crucial break they were desperate for. The guy was still disguised, of course, but one of the surveillance cameras caught a crystal-clear shot of his getaway car, a white Ford Focus. Finally, they had a specific vehicle to track, and they immediately put out a bolo, be on the lookout, across the country.
So, after this massive manhunt with high-tech tracking and multiple FBI field offices involved, the whole thing came to an end in the most ordinary way you can imagine. A routine traffic stop on a Texas highway.
On March 13th, a Texas patrolman spotted that white Ford Focus. He followed the car, just waiting for any little mistake, and then he pulled the driver over for going just 2 miles per hour over the speed limit. The driver was super calm, handed over his Alaskan driver's license. His name was Israel Keys. A quick search of his car sealed the deal. I mean, it was all right there. They found Samantha Koenig's debit card, her cell phone, the exact ski mask from the ATM videos, and the gun he used in the abduction. There was absolutely no doubt about it. They had their man.
Once he was in custody, Keyes eventually decided to confess. And what he told them was a horror story beyond anyone's worst nightmare. He admitted the entire ransom plot. It was a total sham. He'd never spoken to Samantha's father. She wasn't waiting somewhere to be rescued. It was all a big lie.
In that proof of life photo, this was the most depraved, cruel part of the whole thing. Keyes confessed that he had actually murdered Samantha within hours of kidnapping her. 2 weeks later, he went back to the shed where he'd left her body, dressed her up, put makeup on her face, and literally stitched her eyelids open, all so he could take that photo to make it look like she was still alive. It was just a cold, calculated ploy to get money.
But the confession revealed something else, something that really shook these seasoned investigators to their core. Israel Keyes wasn't just a murderer. He was a predator unlike any they had ever encountered.
You see, Keyes had this whole system. For years, he'd been traveling around and burying what he called kill kits all over the United States. These were basically Tupperware containers filled with guns, zip ties, cash, everything he'd need to abduct and murder someone on a whim. This meant he could be anywhere, see a random person he wanted to target, dig up his nearest kit, and kill without leaving any trail back to himself.
And that is what made him a ghost to law enforcement. Think about it. Most serial killers have a profile, right? A specific victim type, a geographic area they stick to, a signature move. Keyes had none of that. His methods were so completely random that he was nearly impossible to predict or track using any of the traditional profiling techniques.
His method basically defied all of the rules. He chose victims at random, men, women, old, young. It made no difference to him. He had no geographic boundaries because of those kill kits, and his motive was terrifyingly simple. He killed because he liked it. Samantha Koenig wasn't a target for money. She was just the person who happened to be in that kiosk when he got the urge to kill.
Keyes did admit to a couple of other murders, but before he could reveal the true, full extent of his crimes, he took his own life in his jail cell in December of 2012. He left a note behind, but it offered no answers, no apologies, and certainly no closure for the families of his many unknown victims.
So the big question remains, how many people did he actually kill? Well, the FBI's best guess is at least 11. And that number comes from a drawing that Keyes made in blood on his cell wall before he died, a drawing of 11 skulls. But really, it's just that, a guess.
And that leaves us with the most haunting question of all. With kill kits buried all over the country and a decade of untracked travel, Israel Keyes took his secrets to the grave. How many more victims are out there, their cases still cold, their disappearances still a complete mystery? We'll probably never know for sure.